Good morning. This is chapter 4 of Face of God by Talitha Cumi. And chapter 4 is birth, entering this world with a pure heart. And the preface is children are honest and wholesome at heart. They do what is asked for love in totality or in part. Stealing candy from a baby is easy and simple indeed, for they have no conception of meanness or selfish greed. Anyway, here we go. Early morning on February 28, 1958, in a Gary, Indiana hospital, my early life began. I was born the oldest of my parents' 4 children. My sister would follow my entrance into this world 15 and a half months later. She was a sickly child born with yellow jaundice. She required a lot of attention and medical support due to her frail condition. 25 months later, identical twins, my brothers, were born to complete the family household. Industry provided a neighborhood backdrop: 13 steel mills, the world's largest petrochemical refinery, then Standard Oil, several food processors, and a conglomerate of other industrial and chemical manufacturers housed their operations within the vicinity of adjacent cities, namely Whiting, Hammond, Gary, and East Chicago, Indiana. Every city block had its own distinct odor, depending on the wind conditions and stench emitted from the nearest industry. However, the full extent of hazards from environmental pollution were unknown and dismissed in that era. In 1959, Whiting, an average middle-income, 3-bedroom, single-family residence, sold for near $14,000. Home mortgage interest rates were near 6%. Union labor earnings started at close to $3 per hour and rose in accordance with job skill and tenure. Lake County in northwest Indiana has been coined the Calumet region. It is the armpit of the nation. Its geographic location includes the most southern tip of Lake Michigan and adjoins the east boundary of Chicago, Illinois. Back in the mid-1950s, the area was one of this country's best locations for employment, housing, and the pursuit of happiness. In general, the majority of the Calumet region's blue households comprised Catholics of Slavic descent. One family breadwinner, usually the father, worked in a nearby mill. The other parent stayed at home and raised their elementary-age children, who commonly attended a neighborhood parochial school within walking distance. Good employment and a low cost of living prevailed in the post-war World War II baby boom economy. It was supposedly an idyllic time. By all accounts, I was a happy baby. I entered this world with a full head of brown, shoulder-length hair. According to my mother, I had been wished for since she was a teenager. Mom always knew and prayed that when she married and started her family, her firstborn would be a daughter. What some children experience as part of their initiation and education in our society may be opposed to God's preferences. I had attentive parents that devoted much of their lives to my well-being, especially as an infant. However, one's upbringing may either assist or hamper proper decision making. In one of the many books written by the famous psychic Sylvia Browne, she writes about what occurs beyond the veil of death. Sylvia tells us the most beautiful and inspiring story. She states that the majority of souls during this lifetime and untold other times we've experienced have been meticulously prepared to learn certain skills to be developed in this lifetime. Sylvia indicates that our experiences in life were predetermined prior to our current earthly existence, and that, in essence, we have contracted with God to experience the challenges our lives have unfolded, all for our eternal good and betterment. She also states that the more difficult lives are reserved for those souls who are of a higher level than others are. Whether or not Sylvia's descriptions of her purpose for entering life on planet Earth rings true for readers, her assertions complement some of my experiences and knowledge. I was pleased to have found her writings decades ago, as it provided some clarity to some of my experiences. Unfortunately, experience is something as quite is different from just reading about it. Thus, I hope my readers will share similar insights and be able to understand more fully as I proceed. Childhood experiences can be problematic and confusing. The best intentions can have unwanted effects. Children face reality, though the forced actions of others. Developmental skills typically arise through trial and error. Just as children learning to walk must fall a few times before they effectively maintain their balance and can carry their own weight. Life experiences presented to young children can be confusing and seem inappropriate and erroneous to their understanding. Children are born ready to learn. They cultivate 85% of their intellect, personality, and skills by age 5. The first months and years of a child's life sets the stage for lifelong development. Because of the importance of early brain development, which happens in the early years, has serious implications for public policy. The human brain develops more rapidly between birth and age 5 than during any other subsequent period. That is from the Wisconsin Council on Children and Family Quality Matters, a policy brief series on early care and education. Anyway, I recall an insignificant incident which made me feel abandoned and rejected when I was about 13 months old. My mother and a friend of hers were enjoying coffee as they sat at the kitchen table. I napped in the bedroom with access from the kitchen and awoke to their conversations. I wanted to be part of their gathering, and I made baby noises to gain my mother's attention. Her first instinct was to check on her infant, and she started to rise from her seat to meet my desire. However, possibly her woman friend did not want me as an intrusion, and my mother returned to her seated position. I started to cry. I wanted my mother. There was no need to keep me in my crib when I was awake and could join in their companionship. Unfortunately, the woman friend told my mother, "Crying is good for a baby. It helps develop strong lungs. Let her cry." Moreover, my mother, although torn between my desire and that of her friend, chose to leave me alone until I cried myself back to sleep. Instead of feeling the love and bonding I desired, I felt dejected and unwanted. However, my mother did spend a lot of time with me, especially teaching me to read. By first grade, I had read over 70 books with my mother's assistance and support. Granted, they were extremely elementary manuscripts, but books nevertheless. The Good Samaritan stories always rang true and was my favorite. In fact, one of my first independent class assigned projects was to write a story. I chose that one. Written in crayon on construction paper, the story illustrates a child's use of a limited vocabulary. The spelling is incorrect but phonetic. Two 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper folded in half constitute the final product. Any topic was available for the project, but I felt that concentrating my efforts on a story that depicts service and help to another in need would best reflect my motives in this world. By the time I was 5, the dismal reality of this worldly existence had fully started to show its ugly face. During a television news broadcast, I had heard a warm and loving message presented by Martin Luther King. I did not understand the severe criticism given to the speaker. He spoke beautiful words that touched my heart. However, race was then an issue for my community. Few adults in my household saw past the exterior skin pigmentation and into this man's heart. Additionally, that November, President Kennedy was assassinated, tragically and in public view. The country grieved. School dismissed its classes early, and I walked home, realizing that something terribly troubling had just happened. Although elementary school experiences provided a relatively genteel period in my life, there were a few exceptions. Kindergarten introduced me to the need for acceptance and the complications associated with blending into a large group environment. Not only did I encounter varying personalities and preferences among the 30 or so classmates, I now needed to impress another adult, the teacher. As years passed and I faced other conditioning events, I became a person with baggage similar to that affecting every one of God's creatures here on earth. It took decades of discipline and conditioning to remove the purity of infancy and replace it with societal normalcy and acceptance. My teaching to become an accepted member of society with new values implanted is the type of conditioning all children receive as they grow into maturity in this earthly world. Living in a vacuum is not possible. Every individual's conditioning also relies on one's need for human interaction and acceptance. Every child knows the truth. Young children do not lie. That outcome occurs as we grow, learn, and enter maturity, or rather, what we deem as such. Children do not question, not really. They absorb and explore until told otherwise, when they officially mature. However, this world holds materialistic values dear. Our reprogramming initiates and cultivates a materialistic environment. Spiritual values are discounted in favor of materialistic goals. That is what makes this world unique. The days of dropping out of society to become a monk or other spiritually devoted have been lost favored among today's humankind. From before attending nursing school, I remember another insignificant incident with several other children as we played in the street in front of our homes. I was about a year older than the other children were and had the answers to questions they asked. Immediately, in appreciation of my knowledge, immediately in appreciation of my knowledge, a stream of other questions to which I did not have an honest answer began to flow. I knew then that I could fudge a response and gain incredible power over these children. Power, that is, that a preschool child could use to become a tyrannical leader or just a plain neighborhood bully. I knew dishonesty was wrong. Despite my knowledge that others would not be able to prove my ignorance, I knew it was wrong to mislead them. So I truthfully told them I did not have their answer. Immediately, I could sense their respect of my supremacy begin to disappear. Yes, children are born into this world pure and honest. They know right from wrong. Their existence here and before their earthly birth was designed and acknowledged from higher powers. Each birth is a result of God's creation, which began before conception. We each exist before our entering this earthly plane. However, life has a perverse way of misleading each of us. Choices that should be easy to make become difficult decisions when so much negativity infiltrates our being. Young children aim to please. They are very compliant to the whims and desires of adults whom they look to for acceptance and love. When the option to do right, as the knowledge pre-programmed into our existence suggests, is contrary to the request of a child's benefactor or parents, a difficult dilemma occurs. Eventually, the will of the stronger entity, the adult, wins. Children process so much information at an exponential pace during their development between birth and 5 years. Although much of their teachings, good and bad, may not be apparent, they are possibly forgotten. Those lessons remain present. They are now part of that individual. I also recall some very painful childhood emotions from beatings with my father's belt for some wrongdoing, some possibly insignificant wrongdoing in the eyes of my parent. That do what I say, not what I do mentality of pure obedience and observation falls short of understanding. Beating compliance into a child remains barbaric in my opinion. Shame that now, nearly half a century later, I still remember these traumas. Parents, do not beat your children. By the time I was in the third grade, a new family environment was to unfold. Typically, the day would appear normal, children playing as children do. Then my father would come home from work, and my mother would scream that the children did not listen to her and needed discipline. So out came my father's belt, and butts were whipped. The beatings were not very severe, but they hurt nevertheless. Compared to the family environment that my father endured, where his older sister died after a beating, they were not severe whippings at all. My father had been born the fourth of 5 children. His oldest sister was his care provider. My father's parents could place the word dysfunctional in high esteem from the family environment they created. My father's mother became pregnant with his oldest sister when she was only 16 and unmarried. She did marry her fetus's biological father, but it was a forced marriage. Eventually, the couple produced another 4 children, making the total 5 siblings. My father's father was a simple carpenter from Romania who immigrated to the United States in the early 1930s. He later became a violent alcoholic who beat his wife and children, sometimes for no apparent reason. When my father's sister, who was his real care provider, turned 17, she had developed rheumatic fever and did not menstruate. Since she was only weak from her illness, my father's father thought she was pregnant and gave her a beating. She died. My father had lost the one person in his family that provided him the warmth of love and concern. My father's mother, furthermore, did not provide her family. My father's mother, furthermore, did not provide her family their desired maternal love. Rather, she was a bitter woman who periodically exclaimed to anyone within earshot that she had dropped my father on his head when he was an infant because he was not wanted. However, my father and mother remained close to their parents and visited them every Sunday after Catholic Mass with my brothers, my sister, and me. When I was just a few years old, I also had a negative experience with my grandmother. The woman stole one of my favorite headbands. The band was a bright turquoise nylon fabric. It was a hit color for that time. I wore it to hold my hair away from my face, and I tinkered with it constantly. During one visit to my grandmother's home, the band disappeared. I searched for it and questioned all present if they had seen it, including my grandmother. However, no one had. My favorite headband was lost. The following week, the band was on my grandmother's head. When I explained, "Grandma, you found my headband," she coldly retorted, "This isn't yours, this is mine." My grandmother had stolen her grandchild's headband, and my parents and I knew it. However, rather than force the issue, my grandmother would keep the item, and my parents and I would leave the issue alone. My grandmother on my father's side was a selfish, cold, and impassionate woman. Sadly, my mother's natural mother died shortly after my mother's birth. Although the birth was a happy one and my mother brought much joy to her mother, she died within 3 months of giving birth. Unfortunately, my mother's mother married a bitter, good for little alcoholic. He too beat my mother's mother. There existed much speculation regarding the cause of death for my mom's natural mother. Since neither my mom's mother nor her drunken husband was available to raise my mother, her natural father's mother, my great grandmother, took my mother in when she was 10 days old. The true reason my mother's natural mother was unable to care for her newborn and infant remains unrevealed. Possibly that era was a much uncivilized remnant of society. Even in old Popeye cartoons, struggling olive oil happens regularly, by accident, of course, but domestic violence existed. Let me repeat that. Perhaps that era was a much uncivilized remnant of society. Even in old Popeye cartoons, slugging olive oil happens regularly, by accident, of course, but domestic violence existed and was portrayed in childhood cartoons. My great grandmother owned the home where she, her daughter, and her daughter's husband and her granddaughter also resided. My great grandmother's daughter is the sister of my mother's natural father and is my mother's natural aunt. My mother's natural aunt and her husband would raise my mother as their own child along with their own daughter, who was born into their family 14 years prior. I would call them Grandma and Grandpa, as they were my favorite part of our Sunday after Mass family visits. It was not until I was an adult that I learned of the distance relationship. My favorite grandfather came from a wealthy and educated background. His family was in the ice business long before refrigeration was available for food preservation, at least until the Depression hit, when ice became a luxury item and the business folded. However, my grandfather did benefit from a college education, back when only those who could afford college attended. Grants and government programs were not available then for the mass of society. My favorite grandfather worked at Standard Oil in Whiting, Indiana. It was then the largest petrochemical refinery in the world. He was a gentle, caring, and loving man. Grandpa always had a lap or leg available for one of his grandchildren to sit on, and he spoke and lavished his grandchildren with love and concern. During one of the Sunday visits to each grandparent's home, I experienced a troubling incident resulting from an inadvertent meeting with my mother's natural father. He was still an alcoholic and a loser. He had shown up on his sister's doorstep in search of a place to stay, and they had given him a bed and a room in their basement. I wandered downstairs into the basement for some reason and encountered my mother's natural father. Always friendly to strangers, I greeted the man. He was mean and a rotten individual. Cruelly and without substance, he informed me that I was an unwanted child. How disgusting it is for any individual to unnecessarily trouble a young and impressionable mind, especially when those comments are untrue and are intended to pierce deep to emotionally scar innocence. During her childhood with my favorite grandparents, my mother had experienced several negative encounters with her natural father as well. On one occasion, when my mother was just a few years old and able to comprehend that her natural mother had departed from this earthly world existence, her natural father asked my mother if she wanted to know about her natural mother. Well, of course she did. However, he then informed my mother that she was the one who had killed her mother. My mother grew up wondering what the true reason was for her mother's death. Some family members would tell my mother that her mother died from sunstroke. Others speculated that she might have committed suicide, suggesting that she had suffered a mental breakdown requiring hospitalization. My mother was never able to discover the true cause of her mother's death. Medical records and technology were primitive compared to today's standards. Only conjecture was available for my mother to grasp the actual cause of her mother's death. By the time I reached the third grade, an acceptable and pleasant understanding of life also developed. The hard knocks and confusions of growing pains subsided. I now had friends and a stable, content daily routine. A nun of our class was a wonderful woman. A birthday party was scheduled, and I was to invite 10 friends. It was difficult to limit invitations to only 10 recipients. After all, I tried to be cordial to everyone. I did not feel comfortable limiting my party to only 10 people, especially when others wished to be welcome. My mother allowed me to invite a few more. But by the time my classmates realized I was having a birthday party and many children were attending, appeared to be little alternative but to invite everyone. No one should feel left out. Every classmate, including our class nun, was invited. My mother prepared refreshments and a cake for only 12 to 14 guests. I did not have the nerve to warn my mother of the actual quantity of individuals invited to my birthday celebration, which was more than 30. Maybe only a few would show. Nevertheless, everyone did attend, including our class nun. I was very happy she came. However, my mother went into shock when she saw how many children were running rampant through her home, and then a nun arrived. My mother took it as a real personal challenge. Even so, the party was a great time. The children enjoyed each other's company. We also had great appreciation of our class nun's arrival. She had developed an excellent rapport with her students. Her presence and blessing at my party was a special treat for all, that is, except for maybe my stressed mother. I was lucky in my upbringing. I did enjoy a relatively simple early childhood with few confrontations placed in my way. Not all children are as fortunate. An interesting point regarding the proper way to treat children and the need for parents to show compassion and understanding to young children I found alluded to in a scene from Mel Brooks' movie History of the World Part 1. Although the movie portrays a comedic parade of humorously interpreted historical events, its depiction of Moses descending the mountains with 3 tablets provides question. As Moses calls his people, stating that he has God's 15, he drops a tablet, regains composure, and continues his call with God's 10 commandments. Although this movie provides witty entertainment, possibly there is some merit in this scene's depiction, even though this is just a movie and no one of a sound mind claims to have been present when God gave Moses his commandments. Whether there is 10, as the Bible states, or whether there were more commandments, is subject for a nonsensical discussion. The Ten Commandments of Exodus King James Bible is number 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me. 2, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness, anything that is in heaven above, that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me, and keep my commandments. Number 3 is, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for God will not hold him guiltless and takes his name in vain. 4. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt do any work, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. 5. Honor thy mother and mother, that thy days may be long upon the land that the Lord thy God gives thee. 6. Thou shalt not kill. 7. Thou shalt not commit adultery. 8. Thou shalt not steal. 9. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. 10. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is thy neighbor's. The Ten Commandments are wonderful social laws to uphold communities from anarchy and provide for a civilized, peaceful, and respectful advancement of society in general. They assist the implementer in the knowledge and comfort that laws are in place for the benefit and advancement of society and group norms. Individuals have a prescription from which to join in complement with their neighbor. Concerning an individual's advancement, some other commandments are possibly needed. If one is to honor one's parents in accordance with the fifth commandment, then certainly one of the broken tablet commandments is also to honor one's children and to not beat them into compliance. Respect breeds respect, as every other emotion breeds the same emotion. Children aim to please their parents. Approval, acceptance, and love are important to children and their emotional and mental development. Not to rebuke the passages of the Holy Bible, but rather to complement God's work through natural observations. Possibly some lost commandments exist and therefore need identified and rewritten. Luckily, any lost commandments are not gone. We have knowledge of truth and righteousness within each of us. Granted, many years of brainwashing and hypnotic suggestions may have veiled what each of us knows regarding right versus wrong. We remain privy to the truth. It is within us. Young children have little choice but to be impressionable. After all, their wisdom from experience is just starting initiation. Unfortunately, child's play is nowhere near what life dumps on an individual. Uncontrollable circumstances affect everyone. A person's actions will affect others whether they realize it or not. Adjusting to the demands and expectations society places on youth seems to begin once an infant develops consciousness and continues throughout life, far into adulthood. We come with everything we need as we enter this world. Otherwise, why would God allow us to exist in limitation when He has created everything, including us? Yes, born butt naked and without coin or purse, we come into this world with everything we need to survive and grow, prosper, and achieve wondrous feats. Anything we desire, we set our minds to achieve. Not regarding the privilege or drain that family influences provide, strange is the myth that we humans typically use less than 10% of our brain. In fact, we use 100% of our brain. Maybe we just do not realize it, and that is what gives this lore merit. Free will is exactly what the words imply. Every human being has the freedom to choose his or her thoughts, actions, and beliefs. Conditioning can corrupt and impede proper options, yet ultimately the choice to live one's life in the manner one elects is alone an individual's choice. Ourselves Allowing ourselves to accept confidently that we can discern the right choice at the correct time is a gift we each hold. Utilizing that gift to its fullest remains a lacking talent for the majority of humanity. In time, as humanity advances spiritually as well as materialistically, the bridge between the two will provide the onset of the peace that many souls desire. I believe that day is here. We are now advancing towards peace. Today it appears that the balance between good and evil has many good crusaders here on planet Earth. It is also possible that people are just making proper decisions based on their internal knowledge rather than accepting the conditioning that is implanted. Dogs. The expanse of knowledge, previously distorted and hidden from many, is encompassing our planet. The veil is now being lifted. And that concludes chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned for chapter 5. Bye.